the interesting new features is the ability to use a feature line as a center line for a corridor. So typically you'd have to use alignments and profiles all the time. Well, feature lines are sort of like 3D polylines that are all tied together, and we can create a corridor directly from them. So if I go to the home ribbon, create a corridor, you'll see there's now a new option to either use alignment and profile or use a feature line. So I'm just going to use a feature line, and I'm going to select this feature line here, and the assembly I'm going to use, I'm actually going to create a little stockpile in the inside here with benching. And I want to show some of the limitations with both using feature lines as a corridor and also the curve cleanup for resolving bow ties on the inside of alignments and feature lines. So benching inside, don't want to set the baseline and region. We'll just call this stockpile. So I've used a feature line here as my. So I've got a assembly over here. Let's have a little gander at it. It's basically center point, and it just has some benching that goes up on the inside. Now I'm going to create a surface from this, and so we can then see some of the basic functionality. So I'm just going to add the top links for now. We'll talk about the rest in a sec. And actually I will also add the feature lines as well, because I'm going to need them to form break lines, and give this a style, maybe triangles at 1 meter. Okey-doke. So you can see what it's trying to do is at all the corners and the interior overlaps, it's working its way inside and finding the average slope, just like you do when you're using gradings, except it's doing it natively within corridors. Now the only catch is there's a few caveats here. Firstly, it only works with fixed links. So if I was to use a daylight on the inside or on an interior overlap, it won't work for daylight corridor assemblies. It'll only work for fixed corridor assemblies. Secondly, there is also some limitations to how this will work when we start adding curves into the mix. So currently this is just a straight line, vertex to vertex, straight sections. If I was to turn this into a curve, so if I was to say, okay, feature line, I'm going to add a insert curve with a radius of 10 meters, hit enter, you'll notice, and I'm going to change this corridor to rebuild automatic, that it doesn't resolve the overlap. The developers at Civil 3D have said, well, if you want a curve, then you should just keep increasing the radius until it no longer is a problem. But I think that's kind of a little bit half-assed, because what if you wanted to have the bottom section as a radius and then the top section to overlap itself? So it doesn't give you much flexibility at all. So I might want a really tight radius down the bottom of 5 meters, but then I want the rest of it to overlap. Well, then I'm going to have to go create another alignment and resolve that. So that's one of the limitations. It doesn't really work with curves. Let's get rid of that curve. Delete curve U. So it'll go back to, so it only works with straight sections, and it will just form a mitered joint. There is a bug that, let me check if this works here, and there we go. So if you actually try and close a feature line on a straight section, for some reason it lowers it down to 0. Uncertain what's going on there, but hopefully that's resolved in the next service pack. We can undo that. So everything else kind of behaves as normal. You'll notice there is maybe a few other strange things with how these feature lines work. In particular, how it resolves the elevation at that point. Because it's not directly perpendicular to the line, it obviously has to take the average of the two slopes and find the spot in the middle. So let's just try and look at, we can see this resolves the horizontal line work fine, but how does it resolve the vertical elevations? So if we actually pan down here into a 3D view, let's just generally look at it. You can see that it tries to sort of average the slopes out between the last section before the turns the corner on both sides, and it builds the main section up from the corner, but the results aren't always what you would expect. They're sort of um, there's no options or parameters you can change to determine how this corner resolves itself. You sort of just have to keep tweaking and playing with the elevations on the rest of the feature line to see how it's going to resolve. Obviously, the more rapid the transition is, the better it will be. The more subtle the transition is, the easier it is for it to resolve. So you can see like a subtle turn in the corner like that looks actually quite nice, but big sharp corners with significant grade changes look a little bit jutted and don't really give you probably the result you would get if you were to create that manually. So you're probably going to find more limitations as you work with these more. I'm just trying to highlight some of the general ones that you're going to notice straight off the top of the hat. I've tried to do this with a stockpile, but obviously this has uses for developing car parks, small pads, and other sort of complex site gradings around your projects.